In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use dimensional analysis. We do this to convert values among units, as well as using dimensional analysis to solve problems. You may have done this before under a different name. It may have been called the factor label method or unit analysis method. Ultimately, dimensional analysis is about using units to solve problems. The word dimension means unit, and analysis means to look at. So if we're looking at the units to solve our problems. So we often use dimensional analysis in our everyday life, we just don't necessarily realize it. For example, if we're converting between inches and feet, we know that 1 foot equals 12 inches. That's a relationship that's going to help us convert between feet and inches. We also know how many ounces are in a pound, so 16 ounces equals 1 pound. And if you had to do a conversion with one of those, you would probably just do the problem and never even think about calling it dimensional analysis, but in fact that's what you're doing. So when we start to set up dimensional analysis problems, the first thing we want to do is we want to look for our starting units. We want to look for a unit that's given in the problem with a number associated with it, and sometimes we'll see that we have multiple numbers in a problem. In that case, we want to look for the simple unit. So a simple unit is something like grams, or meters, or miles. Then we're going to look for our relationships or conversion factors. So one example is the 1 foot is 12 inches is a relationship between two units. There has to be a connection between the two values we use in that relationship. When we have conversion factors, we can write it as 1 foot over 12 inches, or we can invert the value, such as writing 12 inches over 1 foot. It's going to depend on what units we're starting with and what units we're trying to find, how we set up the problem. But either of these conversion factors are correct. We just have to know which version to use in our current problem. The last thing we want to ask ourselves is, does our answer make sense? For example, if you're told that a newborn baby weighs 42 pounds, you might question that. That seems a little bit large for the weight of a newborn. And so you always want to see if your answer seems reasonable based on your knowledge of the values and the units. So let's work through an example together. How many inches are in 2.6 feet? The first thing we want to look for is what our starting units are. And as we read the problem, we see that 2.6 feet is our given value in the problem. So we know that's going to be our starting unit. We have to read the problem and see what's being asked for. In this case, it's asking how many inches. So that's the unit we want for our answer. Next, we need to think about any relationships we know between feet and inches, and we know that 1 foot equals 12 inches. Next, we want to estimate what our answer might be. So we say, well, we know that 2 feet is 24 inches and 3 feet is 36 inches, so we know that our answer is going to be somewhere between 24 to 36 inches. Now we can look at setting up the problem. We start with our given value, 2.6 feet, and we know that we want to get rid of feet, and so whenever we have any kind of a problem where we want to cancel a unit, if the feet is in the numerator, then we must also have it in the denominator in another step in order to cancel the unit. So we put foot on the bottom, so 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. Now that we see we have our setup with our relationship, we see that feet will cancel and we're left with units of inches. And when we look back to our original problem, we know that inches is what we were trying to find. So notice that I've set up the problem, I've included units with every single number, I've canceled out the units that needed to be canceled, and I've seen what units are left. It's important to take the time to examine the units when you're setting up a problem. If your units are incorrect, there's no way your answer is going to be correct. It's important to write down the problem, even if you think you can do it just in the calculator, because if you make a mistake, it's hard to figure out what you did wrong without seeing your written work. So always write down the problem, write down the units, and cancel your units as you go. Now that we see that our units are correct for our answer, we can do the calculation to determine the numerical answer. So 2.6 times 12 gives us 31.2 inches. With every problem, we have to look at significant figures. So when we look at the 2.6, we see that it has 2 sig figs. When we look at the 12 inches equals 1 foot, we see that these are exact numbers because that's the definition, and so we do not include that when determining sig figs. So as a result, we need 2 significant figures in our answer. So we round down to 31 inches because the 2 is the first number to be dropped, and we see that that's going to give us 2 sig figs in our answer.